think one of the really interesting things to me about this stage, because I was overwhelmed with images, trying to find distillation equipment was so easy. I had everything. And then plus everybody distills things throughout time. The thing that I really noticed about this that I thought was so interesting was we're at the next to the last step. This is one of the highest stages, and supposed to be like this highly spiritual level on a lot of ways. And yet the relationship to the everyday is so apparent and so strong. And that is that spiritualization of matter and the actualization of spirit. And cooking is an example, distilling alcohol is an example, but there's tons of other examples, and that's one of the things I found the most fascinating.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Michael Allen. I am the organizer for the Denver Tarot Geeks here in Denver, Colorado, while Joy is the organizer of the Greater Seattle Tarot Group, as we probably all know that. And Penny is our co-conspirator here in terms of disseminating this very ambitious topic of exploring the alchemical processes or the operations in terms of tarot. So we've been doing this since the beginning of the year. We've gone through each of the operations in turn. And today, this month, we're going to be looking at the operation of distillation, which is the 6th operation in the process and the penultimate one. There's one more to go before the whole thing completes, which is coagulation. That'll come next month. But I'm going to probably just start this off and we'll just start with a really basic definition of chemical distillation and some examples of it. Everyone's familiar with the word in terms of chemistry. So the process is essentially separating components from a substance using a process of evaporation and then condensation. When that occurs, certain particulates and components of the substance will be left behind, while the others will be carried with the vapors. Now, can anybody think of any examples of chemical distillation?
That's how you make essential oils, which I used essential oils this morning over in the
hydrosol or moonshine.
Moonshine, yeah, that's a classic example of distillation, because it's the process we have the old alchemists to thank for all the hard stuff, basically. So anything like that's really like high proof alcohol was a result of distillation. In one of Hauck's examples that he gives in the book is when we distill alcohol, you distill wine, boil that, and collect the condensation, it becomes brandy. And if you distill the brandy again, you get cognac, which is an even higher potency of alcohol. They called it, and actually the word alcohol does come from the Arabic roots of the word for alchemy. Alcohol or something, it's really similar. So, but they also refer to it as spirits, which we'll kind of come to a little bit later. But
so somebody's asked, distillation is evaporation then? Yeah, and then somebody else replied with the correct answer, which yes, it's evaporation followed by the condensation. So yeah, important to note that. Thanks everybody for asking and for answering. Good job.
Yeah. And then there's a few different types of distillations that are used. The most common one is just the ordinary, like the rectification, which is repeated distillations of a substance, and usually by boiling a liquid and then catching the vapors and then letting them condense into another chamber. So those are just, you know, examples of chemical.
So John, can I just ask a clarification? Maybe this is a dumb question, but it is the part that you're keeping the part that's left behind after things evaporate and condense, or is it the stuff that condenses that you're keeping?
I think in general, it's the goal is to go for whatever is left after the condensation, not go for what is behind.
Okay.
The goal,
depends.
well, it depends on your goal is, but I think in this case, one of the goals here is the purification of a substance to bring out all the contaminants and impurities.
Yeah, so you're looking for the stuff that evaporates out instead of the stuff that's left behind because something evaporates out of it.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I think also there's that aspect of that essence that's purified rising up, kind of like we were talking about before with like when you're boiling a pot of water and on the lid, if you have a lid on it, you see like those droplets forming. That is like the that if you had a substance that you were purifying or distilling, that would be what is purified, then rises up to a higher level and then recondenses. And that's what is the precursor to that final stage, is my understanding.
Yeah, somebody says they do that with their tea, and I've definitely heard of doing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can see, well, one of the things that inspired the whole operation too, is like the natural water cycle. When we have water evaporating in, after being exposed to solar radiation, it rises into the air and then cools off, becomes clouds, and then condenses into rain and falls back down again, usually filtering out all of the dirt and the contaminants that it picked up while it was resting in a lake or running through a river or in the ocean, where it's all it's got all kinds of stuff in it. So that's another example of how distillation works.
And
we can-
somebody wrote dew, which is dew is also a good example of distillation.
Air condensing onto a surface. True enough. And I'll probably also just talk about to take this process and transpose it into something a little tangible. What does it mean to distill information?
Well, to kind of just condense it or get the most important part of it or simplify it. And but there's a kind of a potency to the simplicity of it, or the seed or essence of it.
Right, exactly. That's a very concise definition, I would say. And a good example of maybe distillation in the works, you just took a broad, big concept and this squished it down into one easy paragraph and had all the choice words in it. So well done.
I've been studying.
So that's part of what I would like to also get into in terms of when we transpose the idea symbolically from the chemical operation to when we're working with the psychological and spiritual aspects of it, and making that transition, I think helps when we start to look at this in terms of how other ways we just apply that word to different things. In terms of this, when we distill this idea, we distill our understanding of things. We distill the experience of our lives in a broader sense. The tarot is a good example of this process of distillation in the ways, because we're also taking these very broad concepts and ideas and really boiling them, rendering them down to one symbol. And that's kind of like the ultimate in distillation in terms of an idea. It's like being able, if you look at an image or a symbol, and then you have an understanding of that concept already transmitted into your mind because you've made that association. But it's something that really develops over time, an understanding of a concept. So that's another example there. How about when we go more into what was being talked about in the literature that we're looking at here, and we move into the psychological aspects of distillation. We can take some of the ideas that we've already looked at in the chemical and in the mental parts, and see how they apply to our inner lives. So some of the things that is spoken about is, we talked about purification. So what we're doing here is we're purifying all that is left over from the process of the ferment. When we have created this new entity, we have let it, through the fermentation process, die and then be symbolically resurrected. And now we're getting rid of all the impurities that may have been left behind. So in a way, this is kind of like another stage, stage of purgation, like we found in some of the earlier stages, like calcination and dissolution. Another thing that's talked about too is the objectification of the self. I think that's one thing that William Hawke talks about extensively when he talks about dissolution. So, does anyone have an idea of what that means, to objectify the self?
Well, for me, it means to separate yourself from yourself so you can look at it. I hate it's a circular logic, but to look at it objectively without bias or preconceived notions, to actually kind of step away from it and look at it like it was something you'd never seen before, and to look at it from all different angles and come up with an unbiased viewpoint.
That's well put. It's almost like, it is like stepping out of yourself and getting an outside perspective. And then just, taking it for what it is rather than what you would like it to be.
It sounds like it's in comparison to the subjective experience.
To me, I feel like that term is usually used with a negative connotation in society. Like when we objectify a woman, that's like a common phrase. So to me, it feels like if we're relating to an object or like an inanimate object, then it could be with less like emotion attached to it, or less like something that would cloud, I guess, like your objective view of it. But
precisely, yeah, very good point. That's another thing that is mentioned here. The process does require us to detach from our sentiments and our emotional attachments to even our own identities. So it's a very excellent point. And we do need to kind of push those things aside in order for us to look at this objectively, in the sense that we are not passing judgment on it, and we're not necessarily, we aren't, again, looking at it in terms of what we feel. It's more like what we see and what we perceive. And is anyone kind of familiar with some concepts of Jungian psychology? Let's say, has anyone heard the term collective unconscious?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
The collective unconscious is what Jung theorized as an inherited aspect of our unconscious, which it's basically like the preloaded software that we get at birth, which is in a large part transpersonal in nature. We inherit this from collective experiences of throughout history. It's kind of like almost like a genetic memory. And
Software is brilliant and explains why Microsoft Edge keeps trying to take over my computer, even though I try to uninstall it. It's just like, wow, all of a sudden a whole bunch of things come into focus when you say that. That is the collective unconscious. That is crazy and fascinating.
The collective unconscious is telling you to buy a Mac.
Exactly.
We have, let's see some comments here, some like archetypes, precisely like archetypes, because that's also where Jung had theorized where the archetypes originate is in the collective unconscious. We see that reflected in myths and stories and even contemporary, things like films and TV shows. These archetypes keep cropping up. The red and the black books, those are good resources to check out if you're interested in Jungian ideas. The 12th house, let's see, I could see that. The 12th house is, kind of like, the end of that, whole house cycle. You're kind of transitioning into, or immersing yourself into the collective by then. And that's what your focus is. And this is one of the processes that, or was an idea or a psychological idea that comes into play into distillation, where you are immersing yourself in that collective unconscious. With the previous operations, you're at least with the dissolution part of it, we were working with the personal unconscious primarily. That was just all of your own collected experience that you've gotten buried down there. But this is, tapping into something which is more transpersonal, and you're taking on board more content to become more whole. If let's maybe just talk briefly too about the spiritual aspect of the distillation process. If we kind of jump over to that, we can look into that idea of the identification with the higher self, which is another idea that comes across. It's, I think, pretty similar to identifying with the self in Jungian personalities, at least, the self in the capital S sense, where it is that guiding center that, it is really kind of running the show beside, whether the ego is subordinate to it. Can anyone else cite some examples from say mystery traditions or religions that are similar to this encounter with the higher self?
Connection with the holy guardian angel.
Mm-hmm.
Idea. In Buddhism, they talk about your true nature, I think.
Early Gnosticism, as Christina said. Is there any specific type of aspect of Gnosticism that kind of reflects this experience?
Early Gnosticism, not well, I guess the modern too, but the focus is on understanding the self. So the more that you go within, then you'll be able to connect with the divine, which is in all of us. So that was the early Gnostic, early Christianity. Excellent.
Yes. That's a reflection too of what is also part of the process in the spiritual sense in the distillation is the circulation between the powers of the above and the powers of the below, where you're integrating here what is known as the vertical axis of reality, the connection between our mundane terrestrial selves and our spiritual celestial selves. And this is connecting with that, but also still remaining grounded here on Earth. But meaning, kind of reaching that halfway between spirit and matter.
In the Toltec tradition, they talk about something called black light, and my understanding of that, even though it's a really hard concept to talk about in words, it's one of those kind of things, but it's like that distillation. It's the purest form of like the essence of the life force and stuff. So that's the best I can say that in short words.
Very good. Very good. Wanted to cap this off, or to see if we can, I just wanted to just give you an example of a distillation process in terms of culture. So I just want to share with you, is anyone familiar with the artist Piet Mondrian? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, some of you probably will recognize the art when I show it to you, but he was an abstract artist, around the early 20th century or so, and but he did not start as an abstract artist. His abstractions developed over time. Yeah, this is Mondrian right here.
That's
So
really cool.
earlier pieces. So you can see it's fairly conventional, a bit inspired a little bit by Impressionism, but it's a fairly conventional representational work.
But you can still see the geometry in it.
Yeah, you can
really
just see that he's looking very, very carefully at the forms and how to like what kind of patterns they're generating. So we just about Mondrian himself is he was a very devout Calvinist, and he's also very inspired by the Theosophical movement. So he took a lot of inspiration from people like Blavatsky and some of those ideas. So he was very, very spiritual in his views of art, and he wanted to keep reflecting that in his art. And one of his strategies was to move farther and farther away from reality in order to get to the spiritual. So when we come along a little later, we get something like this. This is one of those same trees that he painted earlier. So now he's saying, okay, now we're reducing this more towards the more basic, more important of forms, and saying this is what you should be focusing on here. So we're just kind of looking at this as a case of like focusing more and more on form and structure. A little later on, you get this kind of style where he's even more extreme. So now he's like getting into more analytical cubism. He's taking that analysis and that observational quality, and he's using it to translate what he sees in the outer world as a reflection of his spiritual view. And then finally, it's like, or not quite finally, but we get even more and more, divorced from representational. We are getting more of a very geometrical analysis of things. Until finally, he comes up with this style part at the end of his artistic career, which I'm sure you recognize. You probably have seen this one a lot, or works just like it, because this is basically what he ended up with at the end of his artistic distillation process. Now he has arrived at probably what he would consider the purest form of art. He has gotten reduced to just vertical and horizontal lines, just black and white in terms of value, and in terms of color, only the primary colors. And all of this is still based on observing real, still life. It's not just, abstraction. He didn't just, okay, I'm going to put a square here and a rectangle up above it or whatnot. This was based on what he was looking at. That was just something I remembered from my art school days, and I figured, oh, this is very relevant.
Yeah, that progression is really interesting and kind of speaks to that sort of subject versus object or objectivity that you mentioned earlier by the end there.
That was really interesting for sure.
And it would act as a nice little segue for going into our visual aspect of our exploration. This is we just concluded what we is referred to as the solar perspective of astrology, where we were working with logic and observation and the left side of the brain. Now we're going to switch over to the right side of the brain and look at things from a lunar perspective, with where Penny is, I believe, no, that's Joy. Sorry, we switched things up a little while ago, and I'm just like, okay, I'm still trying to keep track of who's doing what, but Joy here is going to be the presenter of our visual gallery here. So off to you, Joy.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, cool. So I have a slideshow for you, and we're just going to look at the a variety of alchemical emblems and other images that express the a variety of facets of distillation. And this is just a silent slideshow. And so the idea with this is the lunar phase. So John just did the solar phase with these last, if you've been with us, the first 4 sessions or so, we start with the lunar and then go to the solar. But the last 3, we start with the solar and the lunar comes after. And so it's just a silent slideshow. Let the images wash over you, and see what they just let them be. You don't have to think anything special or anything. But if you do get some insights or interesting thoughts, that is always a nice experience. And then at the end, there will be 2 images in particular that we'll spend a couple minutes with and use the Lectio Divina oratio experience with, where we give a short feedback, short responses to the image. And I will tell you more about that when we get there. So let me share my screen now. Okay, so now we're going to proceed to the oratio step here. And so, and that means prayer or response. It's a non-analytical response, sharing only feelings or reactions without censoring or seeking to understand. So with this process, we start with silent observation. What do you see or observe in this image? How does it make you feel? What's your experience? Using just one word or a short phrase, speak your response out loud. And this is not a discussion at this point. It's just a free flow of these short responses among the participants. Anyone can speak at any time. Try to wait for a pause, but it is natural and part of the experience if responses overlap. And if you want to share more than one response, that's also fine. Repeating another person's response is fine if you also feel the same way. We're going to look at 2 images, each for 2 minutes. Take some time to observe, then when you're ready, share your response you have, any response you have, using just one word or a short phrase. Complicated cycles.
Transformation.
Interruption.
Interconnected.
Something kind of creepy here.
Elevation, rising up. Descent, going down.
Confusion.
Refinement.
In between.
Home.
Process.
Enclosed.
Well loved.
Warm, nourishing, delicious smells.
The anticipation of steam when you take the lid off.
Anticipation.
patience.
I have to say, in this particular image, the flame is way too hot. You're trying to make rice, the flame should be considerably lower. I don't know what they're making here. And from here, we're going to advance to the tableau with Penny. Thanks, everybody, for participating. Thank you.
Before I start, I want that last comment, I think it looks like Jennifer wrote Joy's duty. I love that because there is that concept when doing any transformative work, esoteric work, spiritual work, that there is that idea of like a joyous duty, because at times it does feel like a duty or burdensome, and to try to maintain or capture or that essence of being joyful or amenable to it is pretty powerful, actually. So I'm glad someone wrote that. Okay, so the next section we're going to look at are the tarot cards as part of the tableau that we've been working with this whole series as well. So I do have some images for that. And we'll basically kind of review quickly that tableau, our 7x3 table, the 7 vertical columns corresponding to those 7 alchemical stages. So as mentioned, we're working with that 6th column today, starting with the Lover's, Death card, and P20 Judgment. So as a recap, that first horizontal row in the tableau can represent the main principle or power, ability or mental state that one brings to the process. The second row represents the vehicle, agency, activity, or mode, basically kind of what you bring that power or ability through. And then that last row is considered the level of unfoldment, attainment, or the cumulative phenomenon. I recently heard somebody, they were speaking about something else, but it applied to this perfectly. And I think I like it better, but someone referred to the 3 steps as your fuel, your vehicle, and your destination. And I really liked that, especially that idea of fuel, what feeds you, what powers you, and also kind of what are you burning through as you move through the vehicle to your destination. So again, that top row, besides representing the power, ability, or mental state, corresponds to alchemical sulfur and fire, and the mode of self or waking consciousness, and the level of the soul. We've been kind of using the is, does, has metaphors, so it's the level of the is or isness. That middle row, alchemical mercury and water, and at the level of spirit, the mode of super consciousness. And then that bottom row, alchemical salt, the level of the body, and the mode of subconsciousness. So actually, before we do that, I wanted to, and please forgive my super rinky-dink sound transmission here, but as most of us know, and we've talked about, all these tarot keys do have a note that corresponds to them. And I was actually playing these 3 notes that go with the Lover's, Death, and Judgment. And I'm curious, it's just a little piano app, so it's not going to be beautiful. I apologize. But I just wanted to play that series and see if anything comes up for someone, especially now that we've talked about distillation. And in a few moments after we look at each of these cards, kind of facts and figures with them, we're going to tie it together with distillation. But I'm curious if hearing these 3 notes together brings up anything for anyone. So tell me what you think. So I found that to be kind of an interesting series of notes together, you know, especially when you think about like how soundtracks are used for shows and movies. And I don't know, I know it wasn't the highest quality sound, but did anyone have a sense of what that felt like? To me, it was like a strange mix between melancholy and anticipatory.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Does anyone else have a thought?
Uh, what is that old movie? Is it Strange? Close Encounters is what
Oh,
it's
the tones. Yeah.
called.
Yeah. So that's something that anyone can do on your own time once you have those 3 notes with any of the columns. That's kind of a neat exercise if you're meditating on those cards, just to kind of see what might come up with that. So
I just wanted to throw in something. I might be wrong, but it sounded to me like the notes were a fourth apart from each other, all of them.
oh, okay.
So, I mean, that could be something. I mean, there's a kind of a harmonic a relationship between those 3 cards, which is, yeah, I was thinking of 2001 myself too.
Oh, 2001. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, that beginning. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to hear that again. I don't know if it's exact, but it is reminiscent of that.
It's
That
also,
might be what I was thinking of instead of Close Encounters, 2001.
it was also Sprach Zarathustra.
Yeah.
Richard Strauss, and he goes da da da. That's just like a basic, chord of like a root,
Yeah.
fifth, and octave.
So maybe that's where I was getting that sort of anticipatory feeling of it. It felt like something that was sort of leaning towards something's going to happen.
That's really fascinating.
You're not quite sure what the result is going to be, but it's going to be dramatic.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, yeah, at this kind of this stage of like the final purification or how can others have, called the spiritization of the substance or the actualization of spirit, depending on if you're working with the, above, up earth to above or above to below. Yeah. So I just thought the music was interesting. That's something if you guys want to look into that further. When I put out the handout at the end, each of the slides will show what note goes with which card. So starting with our top row, key 6, the lovers, I'll just quickly go over these tidbits on each of the 3 before we start our discussion. So the Hebrew letter here is Zayin, which is the 7th letter and typically means a sword, but is also connected to ideas of struggle, also nourishment, because of the root word Zayin. And then 7, being as it's the 7th letter, also connects to the Sabbath or Shabbat and the 7th day of rest, and also just generally separation in time. There's a lot of words in Hebrew connecting to ideas of time or the demarcation of time or length that have this root or the Z or Zayin in them. The aspect of consciousness in terms of Paul Foster Case, how he relates to it is realization, a stage of realization. So in our looking down vertically, like we talked about, this would be the power or principle or the fuel that we talked about. Sorry, it's supposed to be discrimination. I'm so sorry. That's a typo. I'll fix that and send that out later. For the Sefer Yetzirah, the intelligence is the disposing intelligence. And in this case, to dispose can mean to get rid of, but it also means to divide or classify, or also bringing someone into a particular frame of mind, which I think is interesting that this card, dealing with consciousness. It is the 17th path on the tree of life between Bina and Tifrith, or understanding and beauty. On the cubist base, it is the east above and the line between the magician and the empress. It is related to the astrological sign of Gemini, element of air. Most attribute the angel here as Raphael in connection to air, breath, and super consciousness. And then the biofaculty is that of smell that comes from, again, the Book of Formation, the Sefer Yetzirah. And if you think about smell as being one of those key ways that animals, humans use to discriminate or gain perception, is food safe to eat? Is this room clean? Is it safe? There's this whole idea of smell related to safety or comfort or feeling good, or even, you know, pheromones and human interaction. And so the idea of smell is pretty linked to the aspect of consciousness of discrimination. So general concepts and keywords attributed over the years, the idea of union, specifically the union of consciousness, harmonious cooperation, healthy partnerships, loving actions or persuasion, constructiveness, and as something being beneficent or the fruitful use of one's powers, choices to be made, and investigation. So once we go through these, we can talk about them as a whole right afterwards. So key 13, death, in our middle role of the vehicle or the mode is the Hebrew letter Nun, which is the 14th letter and typically stands for a fish, but is also connected to concepts related to the soul, as it begins the word for neshama, for soul. It also means to sprout or grow, related to fertility, the origin of things, continuity, and multiplicity, and so on. The aspect of consciousness here is transformation. In the Sefer Yetzirah, it is the imaginative intelligence. And a quote from that is that causation is mental and transformation involves changes in mental imagery, that all transformation pretty much stems from changes in mental imagery. It's the 24th path on the tree of life, connecting Tiferet to Netzach. In the cubist base, it's the southwest between the sun and wheel of fortune, is ruled by Scorpio, or astrological sign of Scorpio, ruled by Mars and Pluto, element of water. The biofaculty here is motion, relating to that idea of transformation. The forward motion of life is constantly bringing transformation forth. General concepts and keywords: transformation, transition, change, release, letting go of outworn ideas or things that no longer serve, ending of a phase, and release of attachments. And then for key 20, we have the Hebrew letter Shin, which is the 21st letter and stands for a tooth, but also means fire, as well as transformation. If you think about your teeth as being that first process, you know, the teeth and saliva, obviously, when you're chewing your food and you're transforming your food into energy and nutrients. So this card is very heavy on the transformative aspect and the breaking down of forms, but also the healing and restoring and making anew, the idea of the transformative power of spirit, or that which is unchanged. The aspect of consciousness here is realization. In the Sefer Yetzirah, it's the perpetual intelligence, or that which doesn't change or is everlasting and stretches beyond the conscious human perception. It's the 31st path on the tree, connecting Hod, the 8th sphere of Hod, to the 10th sphere of Malkuth. And the cube of space, it's one of our 3 prime directions, or mother letters, connecting the north to the south, or the tower to the sun. Astrologically related to Pluto and alchemical or primal fire, as well as alchemical plutonium. Typically, this is seen as the angel Gabriel, as divine breath, but blaring his trumpet of revelation and the transmission of the will of God. Gabriel is actually often assigned to water. So in this card, we have both the powers of water and fire in unison, and then general concepts and keywords, revelation, awakening, decision, ultimate choice, awareness to one's purpose, realization of the roles and powers of consciousness, and that ultimate awareness that personality has no separate existence in itself. So looking at these three together and kind of bringing it back around to distillation, if we recall with our previous stages, so the pattern that's set up with our 7 alchemical stages is seen as fire with calcination, that first stage, water, dissolution, air with separation, the third stage, and then earth as our first or lesser stone with conjunction. And then we start again on a higher octave with fire, water, and air / earth for that final stage that we'll talk about next month. So because we're talking about today water, but on our second or higher octave, if we look back at dissolution, which was the second stage, that was, if you recall, more of like going within into the subconscious, submergence, going underneath, beneath. Our imagery for that one was a lot of like flooding and underwater, baths, things like that. This stage, you're actually seeing the water rise. And so that's where we start looking at, the difference between like those vertical or horizontal axes. And so this higher or second octave of a water stage is seen as rising above, and then that we were talking about, like with the picture that Joy showed, like the droplets on the lid cooking on the stove. So I was curious, now that we've talked about distillation and looked at our images and briefly looked at these cards, how we can start making some connections between this column and these 3 keys with this process of distillation. I just wanted to throw out a couple examples to kind of get it going. So first off, I think with the top card, the Lovers, you see that idea, with it being the air element, but that idea of spiritization and the rising up, that is kind of under the domain of air and the super consciousness. We see that demonstrated here with key 13, death. I think, that final stage of distillation and that final transformation before the final stage of coagulation is represented pretty well. And then with key 20, again, that idea of heat and water working together is similar to that process of distillation, applying the heat to the substance. In the instances and the examples we've been using, we've been seeing it as like a water liquid that then rises up and creates the steam or the droplets. So just as like some pretty general examples, when looking at these 3 cards, connections, what more is there to be found when we're looking specifically at distillation? Or where do you see that spiritization or spiritualization of matter working within these 3 cards?
So Penny, I was thinking about the element of air, but also of the evaporative process, that what's evaporating will evenly distribute itself through whatever space it has access to, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, that has a very high resonance. So it's like the purification that you're getting is kind of, it relates back to that word perpetual that was in there earlier, and eternity. So it's, I don't know, that's how it's feeling to me. It's like this really high vibration of energy and of letting that high vibration just infuse everything, right? That there's nothing that kind of escapes it in a way. So,
Yeah, I like that word, infuse.
yeah.
Hey, there's some background noise. Can everybody check your and mute yourself if you're not actively participating? Thank you so much. Please continue, Penny.
Does anyone else have any observations or intuitions on looking at these 3 cards through that lens of our stage of distillation?
Actually, I do, having had not a few cousins who lived in the Ozarks and made their own moonshine.
Cool.
Been looking at the Lover's card. Sort of like a cloud rising. It's a very, very natural looking, seeing lots of nature there, trees, ground green, and the sun providing heat. And then if you think what distillation is, you mix water and all the stuff that you're going to hopefully extract the essences of for your final liquid. And if you look at the death card, there everything is kind of all chopped up. You grind the mash and everything else, and then you put it in the pot and you add heat to it. So it almost looks to me like the skeleton with the reaper is the guy stirring his pot, and that sun rising in the background, that's the fire, the heat that's coming underneath it. And then the third card is the essence is rising up out of that earthy mess that they've been sort of composting and releasing their essences into, and then they're rising up at the call of the angel there. So it's to me, it's a perfect representation of the process of taking something and then cooking it till you get the essences released, and then get the essences to rise up, and then your final product is those distilled and purest of essences.
Yeah, that's really cool, Cheryl. And as you were talking, I realized that it actually works precisely if you look at it from the bottom up too, right? Like that bottom card as primal fire is actually the fire that then heats all the little pieces and parts above it in that death card, like you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And that rises up to the above, or the air, which is our top card of Gemini. So it feels like whether you're working with it above to below or from the below to the above, that it works, which is perfect for the emerald tablet phrase that works with this, because that phrase does speak of that reciprocal direction. So that was really cool that your comment made me see that.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad it was useful.
Any other thoughts on the connections?
For me, there's this sense of like still anticipation. I think John said that with the musical notes. Like you have that something's happening, but it's not finished yet. So it's still kind of in the middle process. In a way, it's like almost there. It's almost ready, but not quite.
Yeah, like it's still in motion, but it's like almost there. Yeah.
And that's why I think there's this magical quality to this part of the process too, because you're getting some, things are happening, but you're not really sure what you're going to end up with, in a certain way. But and it's not as on a spiritual level, I think it's not as describable. So or even a psychological level. So there's this sense of magic, that it's a magical process, and that there's something really actually kind of exciting and fun about that too. That there's so because something's arising that wasn't there before. And that to me is kind of what magic is something comes out that wasn't there before.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'd see something too in case in how it relates to some of the meditative techniques that were mentioned in some of those writings about distillation. And one in particular was the circulation of the light. I don't know if going to jump ahead or step on anybody else's terrain here, and I'm not qualified to teach anybody meditation. So I just know this just from a theoretical standpoint. But from my understanding of it, the process begins by heating or accumulating the energy in the abdominal area. And like allowing that to heat up in that parallel to the distillation apparatus, and then letting it rise. So we have the heat from the fire of sheen, which is the judgment, rising up of that through and being transmuted through death, which is maybe the dissolution of that personality that happens in that process. Getting into the rarefied areas above in the Lover's card, which is air, and using that air energy or that air quality to be discerning and to be analytical. So that's the cooling process that happens, and that allows for the condensation to come back down through the channel of death. And then whatever is not reclaimed comes back up again. So in that cyclical process. So that's just what I thought was there.
There's
Yeah.
a really good, oh, sorry, Penny.
No, go ahead, please.
There's a couple other things, John, because I actually had been thinking about putting in a slide for that and forgot to. But in Reiki, in one of the lineages of Reiki I studied, we learned something called the microcosmic orbit, which is like a qigong. So I don't know. It's something. It's not Reiki, but it works. It's really powerful, and it's exactly what you describe, and you build up the energy at the tanden or the belly, and but you first bring it down to the perineal point and then to the coccyx, and then up the spine kind of slowly and carefully, kind of one vertebra at a time. And then it's important to bring it all the way around the top of the head to the third eye. And that's the image of the cobra hood. Because you don't want it to stop at the very crown of the head, because it'll release upward. So you want to bring it all the way over to the third eye, and that is covering the pot and putting the pot on so that the energy stays within and isn't released. And third eye is our energy point for this cycle. And then from the third eye, you bring it down the front. You have to put the tongue on right behind the front teeth on top, and that brings it down through the face and throat, heart, and then back down to where you started at the belly again. And that is a really powerful meditation. If you do it right and do it regularly, it really clears your energy really strongly. But it's called the microcosmic orbit is how I learned it.
Yeah, I saw that term too when I was looking into this, and it's a much better description than what I could have done. So
I used to do it a lot. And I still remember how.
Well, it's interesting that this particular column or stage really seems to connect well with like actual meditations, physical exercises, visualizations, even the image you showed, Joy, of the pot on the stove, right? Like that's something we all see every day pretty much, and just even meditating on that image is like already helps with like the process you just talked about, the microcosmic orbit. It's like we already can visualize what it's like to lift something or allow something to rise, right? I think in a way that some of the other stages, it was maybe harder to make that connection, especially with our other water stage of dissolution. And I remember a few people that were present for that class, during the images talked about how they've actually felt uncomfortable because of some of these deep water or drowning themes or flooding that it actually, it didn't feel as good. This one, it feels more, you can see just looking at the cards, talking about the stage, there's more that idea of ascension as opposed to submersion.
Well, and I think I think one of the really interesting things to me about this stage, because I was overwhelmed with images, especially if I wanted to get, like, I remember for separation, trying to find a funnel. It's like an alchemical picture. I could find like a picture of a funnel, but just like something from that time period that looked like a funnel. I could not find anything. It was so hard. I mean, I finally found maybe one or two things, but like it was very hard. Trying to find distillation equipment was so easy. I had everything. And then plus everybody distills things throughout time. And so just like, you know, I did two things next to each other, which is a diagram of a still from ancient Greece with notations all over it. This is how to make a still. And then one from modern times, again, for moonshine. It's like, this is how to make a still. It's just like, everybody likes to do this. This is easy. And so the thing that well, I don't know if it's easy or not. I haven't done it, but it can't be too bad. And the thing that I really noticed about this that I thought was so interesting was we're at the next to the last step. This is one of the highest stages, and supposed to be like this highly spiritual level on a lot of ways. And yet the relationship to the everyday is so apparent and so strong. And that is that spiritualization of matter and the actualization of spirit. And cooking is an example, distilling alcohol is an example, but there's tons of other examples. And that's one of the things I found the most fascinating.
Yeah, no, that's a well said point. That you're right. It's like this really high and lofty level that we've reached, yet we see it in our common everyday, especially in the way we, like cooking is a great example because we all need to eat. So this idea of our actual sustenance and survival, you know, I mean, we don't need to drink wine to survive or brandy, but you know, there's that idea of just the things that we input in our body. And it kind of makes me go back to what I had mentioned earlier about that idea, the simplification and looking at these three levels as fuel, the vehicle, and the destination, right?
Yeah.
And kind of, you know, in this case, if the Lover's card or that airy quality or the super consciousness or whatever aspect of the Lover's card that you connect to is your fuel, you know, what would that mean in this process of distillation, right? If the Death card is the vehicle or the mode through which, you know, are you driving, you know, is your fuel gasoline, and did you put it in your yacht? Did you put it in your Camaro? Did you put it in your 1940s Ford truck, like your motorcycle, right? And then that final destination is like, where are you actually ending up? And it's interesting that destination coincides with this level of, you know, revelation and the rising again of the dead matter. You know, that's basically what this card is showing is, you know, as Case puts it, you know, humans rising from their graves of error or the unpurified substance. So yeah, definitely a lot of AZ connections here for sure.
And I love what you said, Joy, about the spiritualization of, you know, matter and all that. Because it's like, what's the point of all of this revelation if we're not bringing it back home?
Right.
You know what I mean? And it reminds me a lot of the infinity symbol, you know, where if you put the infinity symbol up and down, like a number 8, it's like you go up, it's like you go up, you grab that infinite wonderful energy, and then you bring it back down in you, and then you're able to bring it back up again and bring it back, you know, it just goes around and around. There's no, in a sense, there's no point in doing any of this if you're not bringing it back home. So I just love that. That was really powerful and great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and remember our next stage next month, while it does relate to that final level of air, it's also that final stone, the stone of earth. So that's like, we literally are doing all of this to just bring it right back down, you know, and in the Emerald Tablet, it speaks to that idea of like, it is not perfected unless it is within the earth. And it's what you just said, Eleanor, about, you know, what are we doing all this for? And what's the point if we're not actually bringing it to a place that we can engage with it, navigate it, touch it, you know, use it, become it. Yeah, that's a very important part for sure. I see that we're at 12 here. The last slide real quick. And I'm sorry if anyone had other things to say. Hopefully there'll be time throughout the rest, but this was just kind of a little thing that came to me. You know, our key 6, the Lovers, is Raphael, and key 20, Judgment, is Gabriel. And while Case and others don't formally attribute Azrael to the death card, the fact that Azrael is our, you know, quote unquote angel of death, but he is a benevolent figure. In fact, in some systems, especially Islam, it sounds like a very prominent figure and angel. But I just thought it was interesting that in this column, it's the only one that every single key actually has this angelic presence that you can attribute to this process of distillation, which again, even though we're dealing with this idea of water, yet there's all this feeling of, you know, the air and this rising up and coming down. And so I really liked that we could connect different angelic figures in this process as well. We won't go into this discussion too much, but this slide will be in the handout, so it's something that you can look further at on your own time. But that idea of, I think it was in Hawke's book that he used the quote, you know, at the stage as the release of volatile essences from their material prison and then their recondensation into a purified form. To me, there was a connection in working, you know, with the angelic beings. And so I just kind of put some really general kind of qualities or things that these beings each connect to, if anyone wants to explore that further. So thank you. And I really appreciate all your guys' insights. That was awesome. Thank you. And I'll upload the handout to the chat right now.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah. And one of our other angels on Temperance, the Temperance is a really good card for this phase.
Yeah, I was trying to figure a way, like, is there any way to get Uriel and Capricorn and key 15 there?
I would say that would be the prima materia, which is being transformed. And that goes with our the image that I'm going to use for the spread, which was the dragon with the dragon with the tail in its mouth, is indicative of the prima materia, but it comes back at this stage. And part of one expression of prima materia is dung. And there's reports of people trying to distill dung. And they apparently, according to the document I was reading, it was not successful. It's like,
I came across something about that too. I was like, that's an experiment I don't know if I'll be trying, at least not at home.
Yeah, that's not a good one. But that's what the dragon, so that's one of the symbols for this stage, was the dragon with the tail in its mouth in the flames. It had to be in the flames, which makes, so it is trying to be distilled, but it dung is an example, but it's symbolic of that prima materia or the first matter. Some people distinguish between prima materia and first matter as different things, but it's the first matter, and going through that those transformations. Anyway, that to me could definitely be Capricorn and Uriel and the Devil card, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
So we're going to do the tarot spread differently today. I was getting really bored with the other one. I think it's a good spread, but it was taking kind of long, and there wasn't really time to really share what we got. And so it, I don't know, it kind of fell flat for me a few times. But what I wanted to do today is actually do something a little bit different. And we're going to develop our own, spread. And so I'm going to share this, and this is that image that we talked about before. And and this is, we had some really interesting, it's definitely a weird picture, but it was so precisely the energy of the thing. I did want to kind of keep it and work with it. And so this is, I thought this looked like at least a 3-card spread right here, because we're talking about this section, we're talking about this section, and we're talking about this section. And so symbolically, here's our dragon with his tail in the mouth. He is in the flames or in the coals. And he is that first matter. It could definitely be considered dung or something that you would normally dismiss as being not worthy. Just plain dirt, perhaps, or something like that. And he's in the coals, and there is clouds above him and rain coming down, and they're kind of black, gross clouds. And somebody was like, this whole thing is gross. And it kind of is. And I actually hadn't even noticed until we saw it in the slideshow that this guy's peeing into that. That's like, oh, great. So yeah, it definitely, the whole thing is a little bit gross, but that's part of the way alchemy works.
So now we know that the little Cupid in the garden with the water feature where he's constantly peeing is really an alchemical symbol.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so here we have our little Cupid boy peeing down into the whatever kind of gross, disgusting matter that is. And there's the flame underneath. He is pointing towards himself. And this, whatever condensation we have over here is draining off into this one. There's actually a spout and there's an opening. So this is draining into here. So this is the condensation from this section. And then he is adding to it. And then it is being heated and steaming up. And then the steam from that is then condensing. And I forget all the words. I think is somebody help me? Is the alembic the hood? Is this part the alembic?
I'm not sure if that is the name of that part, but I know I've seen that word in conjunction with this particular apparatus. So I'm not sure if it refers to the hood specifically or the whole thing.
Or the whole thing? Okay.
I think the alembic is like the whole thing, but specifically speaking to that, the flask and the beak part, I think.
Okay, so there was a second on that in the chat. So I guess this is just called the hood, but at any rate, this is the condenser part that captures that steam, and this is where you have to cool it down. And this can be cool just because it's above and just, slightly separated from, and so it cools and then would condense into here, flow through here. And then this is not covered and connected, whereas this one is, and it flows over into here. And now we're starting to see more of the gold color coming out, very possibly from his ear. And I'm joking. I don't know what the symbolism is. Certainly the people back in those days were a little bit crazy. And I don't know what all this stuff is. This looks very Mondrian to me. I think it's just badly pixelated, but this looks like energy or something floating up. I think it could be something coming down. I'm not sure, but it's just the same color as this, and this looks to be rising up out of that. And then at the very top there are feathers. So I wanted to open this up to some comments. If we were to do a 3-card spread, and we'll probably adjust it to more than that, but if we were just starting with a 3-card spread, what would you look at as our positions for position A, position B, and position C? How would you describe those 3 positions?
Well, I am getting a
Would,
sense.
would it be the fuel, the fuel, the thing that in the tableau, the fuel, the vehicle, and the.
And the destination, yeah,
the
absolutely, they
destination.
absolutely could be, without a doubt, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
John,
that was coming too with the dragon as the fuel, like that part of the self that, the fire, the nature that needs to get burned away.
I like it, I like it.
Well, for the fact that underneath the dragon it says hermaphroditum, it means it's unspecified, it's undifferentiated, it's you can't tell one part from another,
Okay.
from one thing from another. It's a whole mixture. Like, when you grind up rice, corn, and wheat and you put it all into a mix, can you really tell what's what?
Yeah, it's the mash.
Yeah, it's the mash. You don't know what's in there until you run it through the distillation process. So it's an undifferentiated unknown. The middle one would be the it's a purification. I mean, it involves heat, so it's a purification process. It releases the essence. So I guess for me, the middle question is what is the essence that this thing really has for me? And the third position would be the clarified substance. Like, but what is the core of it? What is the essence of it? What's the most important point I need to take away from the process?
Yeah, well, it's this it's the distillation, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, it's the distilled result.
Yeah.
But for the fact that it contains a caduceus, it has a healing aspect, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, so healing is good for that. So if we were to put the whole thing in terms of healing, let's play with it that well. And John was going to say something. Let's go back to John. And meanwhile, people think about if we put all three of these into healing terms. John, what were you going to say before? Do you remember?
I put it in the commentary, but basically I'm seeing the last three operations. I'm seeing the fermentation with the dragon, distillation in the middle, and alembic, and then coagulation in the last flask.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, for sure. So somebody else says, I guess that condenser cap is kind of the magical key to it all. I agree with that. It does the action of capturing the process and the change state. Well, and I wasn't going to teach anything. I'm trying to just do a tarot spread, but apparently I'm not in the mood. There's that idea of the pelican, which, remember, there's the pelican bird, and it curves its beak down and pecks at its own chest, and we saw the drops of blood coming out, and it feeds its young that way. It's symbolic of sacrifice, and so is a Christ image, and is used in Christianity as a symbol of Christ. But the pelican is also a distillation apparatus that has an upper globe and a lower globe and two connecting tubes. They look like handles, but they're actually tubes. That the lower globe is where your mash is or whatever, and the upper globe is the condenser part, and then the two tubes that look like handles, which are the pelican wings, send that condensation back down. So, and John talked about how it's not, you don't always just capture it. You often will send that condensation back down and recondense it or redistill it, and so on. And so that whole thing is pretty interesting and a nice and pretty relevant to a lot of this. And so, yeah, the condenser cap is that magical key to it all. Allows you to keep going with this and keep processing. Entropy, the degree of disorder or randomness in the system, waiting to be condensed and formed into a mechanical form. Oh, I like that. Entropy, the degree of disorder or randomness in the system, that would be our first matter, I guess, and then waiting to be condensed and formed into mechanical form. And that's kind of the Mondrian process as well.
Oh, yeah, that does relate.
Well, I would say, okay, and then I had asked for people to come up with some ideas if these three were three stages of healing. Did somebody, was that what that was in response to, or does somebody have a response to that one?
For me, it's kind of like card one would be sort of what's wrong, what's disturbed, what's the disease, you know?
Yep.
The card two would be almost like if you're having a surgical procedure or I'm doing wound care right now. And so we debride, we scrape the wounds and poke at them and stuff. Or what's the process that needs to happen to kind of disrupt the disruption, right?
Oh, disrupt the disruption. Okay.
Right. And then the third part would be, what's healing, what's it gonna look like when it's better, or what's getting healed, or how does it manifest itself, or how does it help us when it's healed?
Excellent. Okay, good. The last idea I had for 3 cards is to break it down even to, the heat, which each one of these has, the coals over here, the flame at the bottom. So heat on the bottom, and then as the middle thing would be the material, whether it's the prima materia, the first matter, or whether it's ourselves or our disease or whatever. So material to be transformed. And then I'm taking notes, and then the third card would be kind of the top part. So we can kind of go heat, material to be transformed, and then something about this condensation. So anyway, but I would think about these and come up for yourself. What do these 3 stages represent for you? And those would be your 3 cards in your spread. I do think that we could even break it down into 9 cards, because there is coals and the dragon and the clouds, and there's like either the heat below, or maybe this liquid and the child and the condenser cap, and again the feathers at the top here with that caduceus. And so there's certainly a variety of ways of looking at it and expanding this. But I would say let's choose whatever 3 make the most sense to you, and that's your spread. So there was another one, somebody suggested card 1 is trauma, card 2 is the inner child work, and 3 is integration and living with the healed inner child. So really, really nice sequence there. And so I don't know that we have to actually do the tarot spread in the group today, but that's just my suggestion about how to go about creating your own tarot spread for the distillation process. And let's just open it up to some final discussion and final questions.
Joy, I had a thought on the image, and I felt this way when you showed it during the slideshow as well. But to me, this process, and particularly that image that you just had up, the words, reverse engineering kept coming up in my mind. And this idea of distillation as, getting that final purification. And I can't remember if it was Eleanor or someone else that mentioned, the little things that are left. And so to me, that middle stage, or the picture of the little dude peeing or whatever, you could kind of go either way with that. The dragon could represent the material that needs to be transformed, and then that other flask is the final destination. But it could also go the other way, where we're reverse engineering like a condition, and then we actually work backwards to see what was that original essence or choice or decision or mental image or karma or whatever that brought this, that facilitated this into actuality.
Oh,
Right.
nice.
You know, because we've been using the words like the spiritization of matter, but the other phrase is the actualization of spirit. And it speaks to that above and below, you know, or what the Emerald Tablet says about, you know, rises from earth to heaven and then descends again to earth, thereby combining with itself both the powers of the above and below. So I think in making your spread about this, you could definitely kind of work at it both directions.
I
as
love that.
a cause or an effect.
Absolutely. And yeah, and you might even be, it might even produce ways of reading it both ways as well, or making a reflective spread that steps up and then a
Oh, yeah.
second spread that steps it back down again. That's great. That's perfect. I got it. too.
Also, Joy, you brought up, you know, using 9 cards, which actually, remember, we talked about in the beginning, this is technically a 21 stage process, not a 7, because
Right.
how it talks about doing this whole state or this whole process 3 times.
Yes.
So that could actually make sense to use the 9 cards.
Yeah, absolutely. So anybody that's been kind of following along from the beginning, have you guys been doing the tarot spreads, and does it help for you? Does it help bring it into, make it more applicable to your life, or give you extra insight into what we're doing? Yes, I like them, somebody says. That's awesome to hear. So good, one person I've reached, yay. That's the idea. The idea, and we maybe talked about this towards the beginning, that a lot of the thing with it helps with moving into action is a clarifier on that. Good. We talked at the beginning about you know, it's ora et labore, it's prayer and work. And so there has to be some kind of, it's not an armchair philosophy. And one thing that I've learned through doing some of this study is that because the philosophy itself is so changeable and various according to different authors, and there's different ways of ordering things, and different people assign different meanings to different symbols. The philosophy is not like math. It's not like, here are the correct things to learn, go learn them and then you will know this. It's very convoluted, and so we only get our ability to understand it and to make the mistakes and correct them via the practice. And so the idea for this group, of course, is that we're doing it personally on a personal level, and a personal development level, a spiritual development level. And so hopefully the tarot spreads are designed to help you with that. I think we're done unless anybody has anything else.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.